This one's also mostly biblical recapitulation, aside from a few allusions once again to those contrived ideas about Nimrod. So we'll also rate this one neutral. We can say the same thing about Part 15. I think Fairley's setup about Plan A and Plan B is a bit simplistic, but let's stick with the scholarship rather than his analogies. Part 16 is also mainly biblical recapitulation, although I think Fairley actually used Ahab and Jezebel more as a source for their interpretation of Nimrod and Semiramis than the other way around. Part 16 is yet more recapitulation, though it ends on kind of a bad note. It goes a bit far to rank modern tattoos with ancient practices, because the tattooing of pagan religion was meant to grant magical power, or indicate devotion to a specific pagan deity, not simply to decorate your body. So seeing that as evidence of paganism in modern society, or connecting it to some new world order of the Antichrist, is more than a bit of a paranoid stretch. You can see more on the subject of tattoos in a link I'll provide in the vid description. I'll have to rate this one empty on scholarship. Now about Part 17 on the Jezebel spirit. Mostly it's a fairly simple explanation of how manipulation and intimidation can be used to dominate others, which doesn't quite escape being sexist. It's also in good measure an analysis of how Fairley thinks that fear, as embodied by the Jezebel spirit, can motivate and frighten people. So to that extent, it's more like a sermon than a factual mission, which means I'll give it a neutral rating overall. There is one howler here, though. The claim that in Hebrew the name Jezebel literally means without cohabitation. Although that's a popular misunderstanding often based on some 19th century lexical sources, the meaning scholars assign to her name today is, "Where is His Highness?" the latter being assumed to be a reference to Baal. Although let me add as a joke that in Hebrew the name is often purposely misspelled so that it means, "Where is the dung?" I'm not sure if Fairley wants to make anything out of that or not. Apart from more biblical recapitulation, what have we got here? There's just two particular facts to check out. The first has to do with the Gate of Ishtar, of which it is claimed it contains 337 images of dragons. Then we're told that in pagan numerology, 337 represents hell. So this gate to Babylon is literally meant in a sense to be the gate to hell. Well, a couple of things. The Gate of Ishtar actually had alternating rows of dragons and a type of ox, not just dragons. As for how many there were, I haven't found too many places that give a count, but those that do all agree that there were actually 575 total animals, not 337. I wonder if 575 represents anything in pagan numerology. Maybe it means oops. But then again, I'm not sure where Fairley gets his pagan numerology from either. I found some non-scholarly sources that say 337 means hell in Jewish numerology, but that won't help Fairley for a gate designed by pagans, and I don't see where that's supported either. Another point made is that when Daniel's friends were thrown into the furnace, it said, "We see the recurring theme of fire as the preferred form of sacrifice to Baal because he was the sun god." I've never seen a claim that this form of a judicial execution was considered a religious sacrifice, so I'd be suspicious of that one. The biblical recapitulation continues in Part 19 with an exposition on Daniel, but there's more than a few problems in between. The first is the claim that when Greece was dominant in the 3rd century BC, the Mystery Babylon religion became known as Gnosticism. That's completely incorrect in a couple of ways. The first way is that the term Gnosticism wasn't used in the ancient world. It's a term designed by modern scholars to loosely describe a certain type of belief system. The second problem is more serious, and that's that there simply is not any genetic connection between any sort of Babylonian or other religion and the system we call Gnosticism. which is actually reckoned by real scholars to have gotten its start around the time of the New Testament, not around the time of Alexander the Great 300 years earlier. To be sure, there are some superficial similarities between what Fairley calls the mystery religion and some aspects of what we call Gnosticism, but those are derived from the general background of religious practice, not from any genetic connection. It would be like saying Walmart is derived from Kmart because both happen to have a garden center and a pharmacy. In reality, things like symbols and passwords and so forth would be expected to develop in any religious or social setting. That's because they all serve a practical purpose within those settings. Likewise, Walmart, Kmart, and other similar stores all have some sort of symbol, because a symbol quickly and easily communicates concepts. They also both have pharmacies because, well, people need prescription drugs. Yet no one would say they came from each other. In the same way, Fairley's attempt to make close connections between these groups on the basis of such basic similarities is just nonsense, and has no historical basis in fact. In contrast, Fairley does get right certain facts about the groups called the Nassians and the Ophites. Yes, these two groups did connect themselves to the serpent, but what about the claim that these groups stole the symbol of the cross and entwined the serpent around it? Fairley assures us, you may see this symbol interpreted as Christ crucifying the serpent to the cross wherever it is seen, especially in Catholic graveyards, but its true blasphemous meaning comes from a Gnostic corruption of Christianity. Well, no it doesn't. And it couldn't, because according to the real scholars out there, the use of the crucified serpent as a symbol didn't begin until the 9th century AD, long after the Ophites and Nassians were all dead in their graves. Fairley also claims that Gnosticism influenced Greek philosophers like Socrates, which obviously can't be correct unless those guys had a time machine. Then there's a claim that the Jewish mystical system called Kabbalah also got popular around 200 years before Jesus, and was developed by the 1st century Jewish author Philo. Well, although there are some people who wish they could say that, or that it even went back to Adam himself, the reality is that the system of Kabbalah doesn't date any earlier than the 13th century AD. Indeed, a leading scholarly work on this subject, Gershom Scholem's Origins of the Kabbalah, says that theories that the origins of Kabbalistic doctrine are to be found in antiquity no longer merit serious scholarly discussion. A lot of people will need to use that time machine for Fairley's presentation to have any validity. So apart from biblical recapitulation, this one's pretty bad. I have to rate it empty. This vid about the so-called Pergamos detour is a real weird one, because frankly I have no idea where Fairley gets this idea that all the priests and sorcerers of the religion fled from Babylon to Pergamos. He doesn't provide any evidence for this, and to offer such a highly contrary view of history requires a lot more than "hey, I say so." Well, actually I do know where he got this idea, and it isn't good news. The great New Testament scholar F.F. Bruce wrote an article on this subject many years ago, in which he explored some of the nuttier ideas in currency on this subject. Whether directly or indirectly, Fairley gets this stuff from a work titled The Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop. Written in 1857, this book is a favorite of conspiracy theorists, but when it comes to scholarship, it's without peer in terms of doing it the wrong way. I'll include a link in the vid description to Bruce's article, as well as to an article by the Christian Research Institute, the leading Christian apologetics organization. This article debunks the Two Babylons by someone who used to promote it. Another thing Fairley errs on is regarding the Roman god of healing and medicine. He does get right that his symbol was a snake entwined around a pole, and that there's some confusion with the modern symbol used by medical practitioners, which is slightly different in having two snakes, along with wings. That's actually the symbol of the Greek god Hermes, or Mercury. The idea that this is somehow related to a winged sun disk, though, is something Fairley gets from a non-credible source. Thomas Stewart isn't an expert on ancient symbolism. He was simply a writer on Freemasonry. He's definitely not credible, as Fairley calls on him to designate a bronze sculpture in the nation of Jordan as somehow representing an Egyptian winged sun disk. In reality, that statue was created by an Italian named Giovanni Fantoni, who designed the statue to represent a combination of the bronze serpent raised by Moses and the cross on which Jesus was crucified. It has no connection whatsoever to anything related to Egypt. Another point that the name Asclepius means instructing snake is simply wrong. Henry Sigarest, in his book A History of Medicine, notes one early theory that the name was connected to the Greek word for mole rat. Another source, an article by the Journal of the American Medical Association, connects it this way. The actual origins and meaning of the name may be open to discussion, but no expert in Greek I have found says that it means instructing snake. Fairley closes with some rather paranoid commentary about modern healthcare being associated with secret wisdom, which he says he'll say more about later. Given his record so far, I can hardly wait. This one gets rated empty. This part Fairley moves on to Julius Caesar, and apart from claiming that Caesar was in this line for the head of the Babylonian mystery cult, there's nothing controversial or questionable here. But since that's the only notable mistake in Part 21, it gets a 3/4 tank rating. And like Part 21, this also gets a 3/4 tank rating. Apart from alluding to that Babylonian mystery religion stuff, it's okay. More of a sermon at times than anything else.